Hello, my name is Thane and I like to experiment with AI art. In this video I will be looking at the --style and --stylize options in a detailed overview. All of the images for this video were created before the current 4.4 update, so you will not be able to reproduce these images with the same prompts, but at least you will get an idea of what the stylize tends to do. So let's get started again. Number 1. Sphere. So the top row has the current default style --style 4B and lower row has the --style 4A versions. You can combine the --stylize option with both of the styles as well. The 4B version has really sharp images and the stylize does not affect what's in the image as much as it does with the 4A style. As promised, the stylize 0 does make both versions look more ugly. And increasing the stylize setting adds more sharpness and detail to at least 4B versions. I do really like the more stylized images of 4A style. The setting --stylize 1000 really starts to invent something else to the images. I did not prompt for cats or ladies or spherical architecture, but looks a lot of fun. Right away we can see that style 4B is across stylize options, not really in the frame. It looks nice and sharp compared to 4A style. But 4A style has generated some quite awesome fantasy stuff with higher stylize options. I especially like the stylize 500 images of 4A style and the lower stylize 1000 images of 4A style. And stylize and style options again look more ugly when going from 0 to 100 and get prettier with higher stylize numbers. Default style looks quite similar across the stylize options, not much is affected. And for 4A style the higher stylize options go crazy and do all kinds of cool and weird stuff. I did not expect dogs or birds out of a prompt that asked for a simple sphere. I really don't know what the use case would be to use lower stylize values. I prefer the higher values based on what we've seen so far. Number 2. Landscape. When we look at the landscapes in different styles and stylize options, I noticed that the stylize 500 goes somewhere sharp and nice and then at 1000 goes back to quite something similar to stylize 100. All the style 4B landscapes look quite blurry or misty. Near the higher stylize values it goes nuts again and gives us a close-up of a woman this time. Nothing to do with a landscape. Okay. Maybe there is some tiny amount of landscape in the background. The lower stylize values don't look that bad, but they do something different to the image. The style and stylize comparison for portrait aspect ratio 2:3 follows a similar trend. For style 4B, the lower stylize numbers seem to bring out more painted style and broad strokes. And for the higher stylize numbers the images get sharper and sharper, almost like generated by some rendering software like Unreal Engine. For style 4A, the style is blurry across all stylize numbers. Lower stylize numbers seem to have less detail in the image and higher stylize brings out more. There's even some additional text in one of the images with highest stylize. And for portrait aspect ratio in the 4A style it looks like there is no weird deviations from the prompt at higher stylize values. And then to compare different styles and stylize options, it does look like the default stylize and stylize 1000 are almost identical with some variation happening with stylize 500 for style 4B. The lower stylize settings make the images look like they're from a 10-year-old video game. And style 4A has again a lot of blur. The higher stylize seems to lean heavily towards pink or purple tones. And now we have a woman also instead of a landscape in style 4A. Number 3. Tree. In at least the square ratio the lower stylize values make the trees look definitely uglier. And increasing the stylize does not really change that much after 50 for the 4B style. 4A style does not look anything like the trees of version 4.0 that it was supposed to be looking like. Only higher stylize values bring out more nicer looking images for style 4A. Let's see what the --style and --stylize do. And they do spice up the trees a little bit.
There's even some color in the 50 and 500 stylized versions of Style 4B.
Otherwise the trees look quite similar to each other and the stylize does not do that much to style 4B. It's kind of strange that stylize 50 and stylize 500 look quite similar to each other and stylize 100 and stylize 1000 look too so very similar. It's weird, one would expect some consistency in this, but it kind of comes and goes. Style 4A is completely different. I think I like some images from all the stylize versions. I especially love the tree houses of the stylize 500 and 1000. The images do look quite blurry, yet what's in the picture looks so cool and fantastical. I would love a version that does images like the 4A style, but has the sharpness of 4B. Style and stylize wise trees go from ugly to not so ugly when you increase the stylize value. The 4B style trees change very little with the stylize value, nothing crazy going on. I do like the style 4A trees a lot more. They are somehow more atmospheric and not so standalone. In the higher stylize values, the trees are actually situated in a forest most of the time. This time the higher stylize produces nicer images for 4A style, but nothing over the top. The deviation from the prompt is quite small in this aspect ratio. Number 4. Woman. I guess this is the first time I actually prefer 4B style to 4A style. 4B looks okay even with lower stylize values. I am not entirely sure what the stylize does except maybe adds more detail the higher you go, and it definitely changes the faces. But style 4A is quite oof. The lower stylize values produce some really ugly people and the higher stylize values just go weird. And not in a good way. I can't even describe accurately what happens when you increase the stylize value. The faces go more cartoony, I guess. There's less painting looking in the 4A style, but it really doesn't help. So looking at the portrait aspect ratio styles and stylize options, the 4B style is again not that much affected by the stylize values. Yet again the stylize maybe adds some details and changes the faces somewhat, but for higher stylize values the changes are barely noticeable. The lower aspect ratio has the face of one of the women squished up against the frame of the image too. For style 4A, this time the lower stylize values are not that bad. I actually like the upper right image of stylize 0. The faces are not that ugly anymore, and higher stylize values go a little bit weird and cartoony or 3D movie-like, but I actually like some of them this time. We are following a theme that stylize does very little for the style 4B. And quite a lot for style 4A. Style 4B looks overall painting like no matter which stylize option you use. And again higher stylize values add more detail compared to lower values. Style 4A does not produce very ugly pictures when using the lower stylize values. Higher stylize values have some more color to them and the faces look again more cartoon-like. In the 4A higher stylize values we get some prime examples of Midjourney fingers. Meaning that the fingers look quite weird when you look at them. The poor woman has had some very bad accident happen to her. And she has 2 fingertips on one finger. Also, if you look very closely, I guess style 4A is not that great at teeth, they look a bit chipped and wonky. Style 4 appears to be a little bit better at that. Number 5. Animal. So style and stylize do change some things. But to be honest, I don't really like any of these images. For style 4B, the animals look quite ugly with lower stylize values. And with higher stylize values they look a little better, but not that much. And style 4A does seem to create a bit more realistic animals, but only their faces. Nothing really crazy happening at higher stylize values either, just some birds and butterflies in the deer image. A little bit underwhelming. When comparing the different style and stylize settings, the style 4B has some weird animal amalgamations at lower stylize values. They get a little better at higher stylize values, but still quite weird. And style 4A again creates lots and lots of mainly feline faces. I do like the cat in a jacket with sunglasses at stylize 500. Otherwise, not that much variation. Seems like higher stylize values go a bit cartoony again and add some pink, purple and blue colors. So when comparing the styles and stylize options, Style 4B is not very nice overall. Stylize adds some detail to the images and makes the images look a little bit better. Not enough to make me want to upscale any of them. Style 4A has again only animal faces. Even the lower stylize values look okay, not ugly at least. And higher stylize produces quite cute animals, but they're really close up. Number 6. Architecture. The style and stylize comparison for square ratio gives some interesting results for both the styles. For Style 4B, there are a few interesting results in all stylize values. I maybe even prefer the lower stylize even more for these. Quite surreal still for the higher stylize values. But maybe a tiny bit better than the default stylize 100. And for 4A, the lower stylize produces quite nice architecture. In the higher values, there seems to be some pictures of women coming in. It does seem for the 4A style that it's not really usual for the architecture to be fully in frame. And when comparing the stylize options for the portrait version of architecture, it looks like Style 4B is more modern or futuristic. Lower stylize values seem to make the buildings look maybe a little more traditional, meaning that the lines are mostly straight, although there's some fantasy elements there too. And higher stylize values have more curves. Style 4A tends to be more historical or fantasy or fairy tale-like. Lower stylize values give me a steampunk feel, while higher values seem to depict more Victorian mansions. I guess the higher stylize values look better on Style 4B. But nothing really sticks out as being very good. Lower stylize values seem to have some very thick black borders. The borders are even worse for Style 4A. It seems that the majority of pictures have big black borders. The house styles actually look okay, I guess, pretty houses, but the borders really ruin the images. I guess they look like photographs I usually make. I like to photograph architecture, but I am very bad at it. Number 7. Flower. The style and stylize view for flowers looks like this. For Style 4B, the stylize does not affect the images that much, just slightly. I guess it adds some more detail or makes the flowers look a bit fuller. The Style 4A flowers look quite good too, no ugly flowers to be found. Even with lower stylize values. And higher stylize values bring in a couple of women again and makes the flowers look a bit more cartoony or maybe rendered in a video game or something like that. The stylize for Style 4B does something at lower stylize numbers. At 0 the flowers look quite simple and get more extravagant as the stylize value increases. Again, I notice a funny thing here that stylize 50 and stylize 500 look similar to each other, and so do stylize 100 and stylize 1000. Maybe this observation needs some other kinds of testing to see how the stylize acts. For Style 4A, the flowers look quite good up to stylize 100. After that we get some weird text and women and huge flowers that don't fit in the image. And again the flowers look cartoony or rendered. Definitely not natural. But the same could be said for Style 4B, just that I prefer 4B over 4A in this case. For the Style 4B, the stylize again doesn't really seem to do much after value 50 in this test case. Only the value 0 gives some different results. Again, not ugly and not bad looking at all like some images in this video have been. And for Style 4A, 50% of the images doesn't really change up to stylize 100, and then the stylize goes full bonkers with huge violet flowers and one extra lady. Again, cartoony looking flowers emerge with higher stylize values. Number 8. Statue. For Style 4B the statues definitely look uglier with lower stylize values. They normalize out with higher stylize. Also, it seems like an odd thing that the gender balance looks to be skewed heavily towards female statues when looking at several stylize values. Only the default stylize is currently balanced in that regard. But when you deviate from that, Midjourney creates mostly statues depicting females. Style 4a mostly concentrates on faces again. Lower stylize values are not especially ugly. There are more male faces with beards with lower stylize values and more female faces are depicted with higher stylize values. Also, the pictures get a slight violet hue in the higher stylize range. In the styles and stylize comparison, it seems that style 4b depicts more body in the image as 4a is mostly just faces. 4b style has some pretty unrealistic beauty standards and 4a goes a bit more realistic and down to earth. The higher stylize does not add that much value to either of the styles. 4a especially looks too close up, faces are half cut off basically. For lower stylize values, 4b is just plain ugly with messed up faces in some cases, and for 4a the lower stylize is better than high stylize. And style and stylize settings for landscape ratio statues look like this. For style 4b, the lower stylize values are not good at all. Images get a little bit better with higher stylize values. For style 4b, I guess I prefer lower stylize values. Higher stylize values seem to again go violet. Also, the statues on higher values have the kind of look that they have seen things. Number 9. Emblem. The style and stylize comparison for emblems shows that now the emblems of style 4b look quite nice and fully in frame no matter what stylize you use. The emblems do tend to depict a lot of birds with default values. All the emblems basically have wings. I actually quite like the lower stylize for style 4b, because it gives the emblems some more colors. With higher stylize values, the colors seem to get more muted. For style 4a, the emblems don't look that good. Maybe some of them are okay and in the frame without text. Majority is clipped off in some way. Lots of birds. Lower stylize values are actually slightly better than higher stylize values. The birds do look nicer in the higher stylize range, but the overall images are not so nice. In the style and stylize comparison view, it is quite obvious that portrait aspect ratio is not very good for creating emblems. For style 4b, the colors pop a bit more with lower stylize values and dim out with higher stylize. And for style 4a, lower stylize values are better. With higher values, the animals get nicer, yes, but they're zoomed in more and the emblems don't look very nice when parts of it are missing. In the style and stylize comparison view, it seems that for both styles 4b and 4a, the lower stylize values are better. Some of the emblems actually look okay and fit in the picture. With higher stylize values, the top or bottom or both tend to be missing. Number 10. Logo. Majority of the logos have some kind of text on them. Style 4b just goes from less detailed and ornate to more detailed and ornate in the span of stylize. Same happens with style 4a, but only up to the default stylize, I think. I absolutely love the stylize 500 logos. There's nice variety, although more violet again, but no text and beautifully centered. It goes bad at stylize 1000 though, it's zoomed in too close. Here we have the similar pattern as has been visible before. The 4b style goes from less detail with lower stylize values to more detail with higher stylize values. None of the images of this seed are usable as actual logo designs. Style 4a goes also from less detail to purple and blue clockwork women and animals. I actually kind of like the stylize 500 images, but not as logos. Just cool pictures. And the style for landscape ratio logos for 4b does look really similar to each other across all different stylize values. Lower stylize looks like it makes the logos fit the borders of the image a little better though. And style 4a follows a similar pattern here, same looking logos with text up to stylize 100 and then it goes full on purple owl. I do actually like the stylize 500 birds a lot. They look great. Stylize 1000 goes a bit too far. Number 11. Skull. For skulls, the lower stylize values are quite bad. Both 4b and 4a styles look quite ugly with lower stylize values and get slightly better with higher stylize values. Style 4b doesn't really change after stylize 100, the images look pretty much the same. and Style 4a seems to improve a little bit from Stylize 500 and up. Still nothing really fantastic and awesome, but better than anything up to Stylize 100. For portrait aspect ratio, there actually are some nicer looking images even with lower Stylize numbers. This goes mainly for Style 4b though. Stylize 0 is still absolute garbage in my opinion for both styles. And higher Stylize values seem to change the 4b style actually not that much starting from Stylize 50. For Style 4a, I like only the skull with flower from the default 100 Stylize value. Stylize 500 and Stylize 1000 actually have produced some quite nice looking skulls. Wonderfully intricate and weird. And for the Style 4b in the landscape ratio, the Stylize again basically doesn't really do much. Lower Stylize values are again quite bad. And Style 4a is bad, nice but could be in the frame a bit better, and same goes for Stylize 1000. That's it for skulls. Number 12. Map. Style 4b looks quite good with all Stylize numbers. Lower Stylize numbers seem to be more yellow and flat. Higher Stylize numbers seem to possibly get some 3D aspects in. And Style 4a is kind of mixed. I prefer lower Stylize values for mass. Higher Stylize values go really off topic and the pictures don't look nice anymore. Purple is a recurring theme. For Style 4b, the lower Stylize values tend to produce more simplistic looking maps. Higher Stylize values don't really change much after Stylize 100. Stylize affects the Style 4a a lot more. Some of the maps of 4a actually look okay and are utilizing more of the space available in the portrait ratio. Stylize 1000 on the other hand goes too far and creates some older gentlemen. This is an odd break from the usual young women that sometimes appear in Style 4a with higher Stylize values. It seems that at least on one occasion the border problem is not so obvious on one Stylize 0 image for Style 4b. All other images have the issue. And in this case, basically the maps change very little already after Stylize 50. For Style 4a, all the maps seem to have quite toned down colors compared to 4b. Stylize makes a bigger difference here, although it deviates from the prompt a little bit less than the portrait version did. Number 13. Fire. I don't particularly like the 4b style images. The lower Stylize values are just horrifying, and while the images get a little bit better with higher Stylize values, I still don't like how the only thing depicted is women on fire. There is some variety in the 4a style. With higher Stylize values, the prompt just wanders off somewhere completely unrelated and we get extreme close-up images of women. Portrait aspect ratio for Style 4b at lower Stylize is again horrifying. And again we have women on fire. I do like the red-eyed woman in the default and Stylize 1000. For Style 4a, I actually really like the images in Stylize 50 and 100. There is some variety there. With higher Stylize values we get extreme close-up images on women again. So close that we only get half the face in some images. And landscape ratio does not really change that much for Style 4b. Still horrifying with lower Stylize values, and after that images that look basically the same. The Stylize 0 is not particularly fantastic with the 4a style, but after that it gets a lot better. There's some really awesome looking stuff here. The wave on fire and the tree on fire and the fiery swirls in the sky. Stylize 1000 goes a little bit off again, but hey, no close-up images of women here. Number 14. Heart. For hearts in 4b style we seem to get a bit more vibrant colors for lower Stylize values, and with higher ones it just evens off to gold. But the hearts themselves look nice and detailed and intricate. Style 4a hearts are quite colorful across the Stylize values. Higher Stylize values again tend to go a bit more pink and purple and depict something completely unrelated. They would look quite nice if they were not so cropped. Portrait aspect ratio 4b style follows the square aspect ratio's footsteps. The hearts go from simpler and colorful to more detailed and muted in colors with stylize. I really like many of the 4A style images for this aspect ratio. The only ones I don't like are the stylize 500 images. Otherwise nice, some mechanical hearts are in the bunch. And good variance in colors too. For landscape aspect ratio, the 4B style is again very similar to other aspect ratios, same kind of color schemes and intricate hearts. They're not very well placed in the frame and there's some border looking lines at the edges. But style 4A looks much better in my opinion. Stylize 1000 maybe not so much, but from 0 to 599 there are some great hearts. And a panda. Number 15. Abstract. Abstract prompt in square aspect ratio has some great images overall. Style 4B goes from colorful to different kind of colorful with stylize values. Anything above 100 doesn't seem to change the images much. It does feel like lower stylize values are more random looking and higher values make the images more defined. The same goes for style 4A too. Except in 4A style the lower stylize values seem to change less and then higher values are in their own unique style with women and animals. I really like the portrait aspect ratio for abstract. Stylize 0 images don't look necessarily very awesome, but with more stylize, the images get better and then over 100 the changes are very minimal. For style 4A, I like some of the lower stylize images, but I absolutely love some of the higher stylize images. The ones at the very right are just so cool. Yes, 4A tends to go off topic too somewhat and there's one image with weird text on it too, but it may just be this seed. And landscape aspect ratio stuff is okay. Still good, but not as good as portrait version had it. Style 4A doesn't even wander off from the prompt that much here. There are some nice tentacle waves. And the purple and pink theme isn't overpowering the prompt either. Number 16. Planet. For style 4B, the planets look awesome although they're still more like glass orbs with a world inside them. I like that although some of the images are similar, there are significant differences too in the higher stylize values. And the lower stylize images are not bad either. Style 4A goes good from 0 to 100 and then completely off topic. The architecture images look quite nice actually, but they have nothing to do with planets. Okay, they're on a planet. For portrait aspect ratio style 4B I like the planets. Again, not your traditional planets maybe, but looking awesome. Higher stylize values change a bit less here than in the square aspect ratio. Style 4A seems to have some similar images too up to stylize 100. And then we get houses and slightly older men with a completely different race than usually. I wonder what is it about the prompt planet that ends up with this kind of outcome. And landscape aspect ratio for style 4B. We actually have a few planets that actually may look like planets. Again, some strong comparisons between stylize 100 and stylize 1000 and then stylize 500 being significantly different from both of them. Style 4A does seem to have actually what I would imagine planets to look like up to stylize 100. But higher stylize values go completely off topic again and purple. Nice landscape views though. Number 17. Angel. I had such high hopes for this prompt, but I don't really like any of the outcomes. I guess the angel women look less painted looking than the woman prompt tends to produce. But all the wings are clipped off and located in very weird places. Style 4A is not any better, it goes even closer. The lower stylize values are not as ugly as have been with some prompts and the higher stylize values are not purple cats this time. Portrait aspect ratio for angels is slightly better than the square aspect ratio was. But it's still not what I was expecting out of this prompt. It's also kind of odd that the stylize 50, 500 and 1000 look quite similar to each other and then stylize 100, which is supposed to be their middle value, is completely different. Style 4A looks kind of boring too with this prompt, lots of close-ups, getting closer with bigger stylize values. And landscape aspect ratio angels are also quite underwhelming and not what I was expecting. Style 4b goes from less detailed to more detailed with stylize value. Style 4a looks a little bit better. There is actually 2 images where the angel wings are in full shot, but they're black and white. Higher stylize values have some pretty faces, but again a little bit too close up for my preferences. Number 18. Darkness. I like quite a lot of these. For Style 4b, there seems to be a lot of female faces, but some of them are so sinister that it's okay. And here finally stylize 1000 actually completely changes the images for a change. Usually the higher stylize ones are similar to one another. Style 4a has some great images in the 0 to 100 range. It again tends to go to the close-ups for higher stylize values. For portrait aspect ratio, the default 100 stylize images look the best for Style 4b. For some reason lower and higher stylize values for this prompt and aspect ratio tend to lessen the detail in the image. And Style 4a has very moody images in the lower stylize range. And I just noticed that for the first time ever there is one image in the mix that looks basically the same for both Style 4a and Style 4b. For the landscape ratio it looks like the best images for Style 4b are again at stylize 100. And other stylize values kind of look similar to each other. Style 4a has really nice images throughout and even at stylize 500 this time. So dark and moody as one would expect from a prompt like darkness. Stylize 1000 goes again full female close-up as it tends to do. So here was the very detailed overview of style and stylize. I did not want to generate these images for the third time for this video, so I used the images I created before the 4.4 update. The style and stylize do behave similarly enough even after the newest update to be able to get a general idea of what they do. My take was that for Style 4b, which is the default style, the lower stylize values do make the images sometimes slightly uglier even though there's some nice images there too sometimes. And higher values don't really do that much usually. But there are exceptions. Style 4a has a better chance of nicer images at lower stylize values. And higher stylize values up from 500 and maybe even earlier have a tendency to go completely bonkers and really move away from the prompt. Anyway, I hope you found this information useful. Please consider leaving a like and subscribing to my channel for more content like this. Have a great day. Let's continue prompting.